Alright, folks, today we're going to be starting on a multi-part series where we are going to be attempting to solve a major problem that modern political science has as of the moment, and that is political classification. Basically, there is a lot of classification methods that have nuance, and then there's a lot of political classification methods that don't have nuance but are easy to understand. The problem is that there's not much overlap between those two. And the closest overlap between the two ends up being things like the political compass and 8 values, which, like I've already said, does not have very much nuance. It is not very good at giving you a very detailed outlook of how the world actually exists. And even though the political compass is at least partially based on political reality, I want to try to make a political classification system that actually is based off of a much more modern and nuanced view of politics, aside from, just your average party politics. I want to go outside of simple party politics and look into ideologies that are completely misrepresented by a political system that is based off of party politics, aka the political compass. So for this, I'm going to be taking inspiration. So this time, we're going to start off with the first part of this, which is how this political spectrum is going to treat incentives. So this is the incentive part of the political spectrum. And for incentives, there are two people that come to mind, two philosophers that come to mind when you discuss how incentives should function. Karl Marx and Friedrich Hayek. That's right. People who had the two exact opposite viewpoints in terms of politics actually both made really good points about how incentives function and how people act within incentives. So, because of that, I'm actually going to be taking both Marx's model and Hayek's model. I'm going to be finding a way to combine the two so that we can basically maximize the amount of nuance that we have in terms of this particular part of the political model. So, first off, we're going to take let's take a look at what Marx and Hayek are best at in terms of incentives, because they both specialize in different areas. Marx, when he talked about incentives, he mostly specialized in how incentives evolve over time, how they develop over time, and roughly how people respond to that, although his main focus was the evolution of incentives. Hayek's focus, however, is more focused on how people interact with incentives and how people view incentives and like the variations within those evolution points. So I'm basically going to take those two different parts and I'm going to combine them into this. So, as you can see here on the right, we have Marx's 6-stage model of how incentives develop, all the way from hunter-gatherer society to post-scarcity society at stage 6. Post-scarcity anarchist society at stage 6. But the thing is, and basically what I'm doing is I have this rectangle, and this rectangle is split into 6 parts. And what you do to indicate what part you are in is you are going to fill that particular part with a specific color that corresponds to the part that Hayek is a part of. So right here I got an example. This example is the USA. So the USA is currently under stage 4 Marxism, which is called capitalism. Alright, and so that means it's going to be on the fourth rung from the bottom. And I'm coloring it blue, and it'll make more sense to color the blue part, will make more sense later. So basically, in terms of the Hayek model, the Hayek model is actually Hayek really only focused on capitalism in terms of this model, but this model can be applied to other systems, and I think it would be better for it to be applied to other systems. So basically we have, and really all Hayek did was contribute this x-axis, but we can this y-axis, but we can also contribute this x-axis from, again, Marxism. So basically, hear me out. So in this system, I decided to do a flipped political compass situation. So the right is on the left and the left is on the right. But top and bottom are still the same. So blue, which would normally be off right, is now on the off left. Alright, so let's take a look at what these spectrums mean. So on the right, we have stage relative regressive / conservative. So basically what that means is that, let's take the USA for example. The USA is currently in stage 4, which is capitalism, but they are attempting to take a more regressive or conservative form of capitalism. Basically a form of capitalism that is closer to the beginning of stage 4 than the end of stage 4. So it has more similarities with feudalism than it has with socialism, even though capitalism is right in between feudalism and socialism. A stage relative regressive would be closer to feudalism, whereas a stage relative progressive on the right would be closer to socialism. So think U.S. is closer to feudalism than capitalism, so the U.S. would be in the blue. However, Norway is closer to socialism than feudalism, so Norway would be in the red. We then have this other spectrum. This is really where Hayek shows up. So at the top, we have stage relative intrusive. So this means that some kind of third party, usually the government, because most stages have a government, but it doesn't have to be the government. Basically, stage relative intrusive means that some kind of third party is inflicting itself onto the stage that you're at, regardless of if you're regressive or progressive. And at the bottom, we have stage relative decentralized. This was actually Hayek's ideal. Hayek actually wanted less government intervention in the economy, and he made multiple arguments for that. Very good arguments, might I add. So, and there are quite a few people on all forms of spectrums, including socialists, that want a stage relative decentralized. I'll get to that later. So basically, you have third-party control at the top and no third-party control at the bottom. You also have closer to the previous stage at the left and closer to the coming stage at the right. So now let's look at a detailed model, because the thing is, I decided that I was going to take inspiration from the Nolan chart. Alright, so this is an optional part of this, but basically I gave each of the quadrants, and all 6 of them, unique little names. And these names aren't just pulled out of nowhere. These names are very similar. These names are often used by economists to describe these types of economies. Now, some of them I had to extrapolate because, well, either they have not existed in the past, or the people who theorized of them didn't didn't really make a good name for it. So let's start off with the primitivist stage. So blue primitivism is conservative conflict economy. So think of it this way. A tribal leader wants constant war and leans more on hunting. Alright? So that right, that left side, so the blue side, because it's blue, you have the elders, and they have complete control over society. That's what makes it blue instead of yellow. But it also is more leaning on hunting than on gathering, which makes it more closer to being a wild animal than it is to being an agrarian society. And so that's what makes it blue instead of red. So then we have liberal conflicts economy. So that's basically, again, a hunting preference society with but the elders don't have much power. Then we have communitarian conflict economy. That's where the chief or the elders have absolute power, but it leans more agricultural, so it leans more gathering. And then you have libertarian conflict economy, which is where the elders don't have much power, and again, you lean more towards gathering than hunting. We then have conservative barterism. So conservative barterism basically means that it is, because it's right wing, the village is moving. So from now on, I'm not going to go under the, I'm not going to do the individual quadrants. I'm just going to do like right and top and bottom and left and all that stuff. So the left of our agrarianism is conservative, comprises of conservative barterism and liberal barterism. Alright, and basically what that means is that the villages are like only semi-permanent. They kind of move around and plant. So they move around and plant multiple gardens, and every year they come back to their old garden and pick it, basically. The right, on the other hand, is comprised of communitarian barterism and libertarian barterism. And basically that is where the settlements are permanent, and they are producing all of their food in one main location. The top is comprised of conservative barterism and communitarian barterism. And basically what that means, anything on the top basically means that there is an authority within the village, basically, again, like a chieftain, that has absolute power. And has complete control over how the village functions. Basically like top-down control. Then we have the bottom, which is made of liberal barterism and libertarian barterism. That's the exact opposite. So instead, it's just, free association kind of thing. But then move on to feudalism. Alright, so the left is made up of absolute serfdom and constitutional serfdom. So basically what that means is, what does the serfdom mean? The serfdom is basically an economy built off of slavery. So pretty much everyone within the economy is a slave under like a hierarchy of slaves. And basically nobody except the very few people at the very tippity top are free. And so basically the economy is built off of those slave-master relations. And so on the right, we have absolute mercantilism. Mercantilism, when compared to serfdom, mercantilism is where, even though you are a slave, you are allowed to trade with other slaves and earn money to buy your freedom. So basically, serfdom is where you don't really have much money. is worth something, but people don't have access to money and they can't trade with each other. Mercantilism is where people are slaves still, but they can theoretically buy their freedom through trade and being a merchant and all that kind of stuff. But it still also takes a lot. We then have the absolutes. Absolutes basically means that the monarchy is unchecked. Maybe they have advisors, but that'd be about it. Then we have constitutional. Constitutional basically means that either there's some form of parliament or something, or the monarch is reliant entirely upon, reliant on a constitution and can't, okay, if the Constitution doesn't have much say, it's still absolute. But if the Constitution can actually force the monarch to do something, then it's constitutional. Basically, it's a limited monarch. We then move on to capitalism. So let's take a look at command markets. So command markets and free markets are on the left. So basically what that means is those are capitalist societies that do not have much regulation in terms of how businesses are allowed to treat workers. Businesses are pretty much allowed to treat workers any way they want to, and there is no form of safety net. That's really the biggest difference, is that there's no form of safety net for people who are, kind of losing control. But unlike under mercantilism, we're no longer slaves anymore. Majority of people are no longer slaves. We then have, on the right, welfare and co-op markets. So basically that means that there is now a safety net for people who are struggling. We then have the top, which is command markets and welfare markets. This basically means that the government uses protectionist policies to ensure and keep up basically monopolies, even if they have anti-monopoly laws. If it has a practical monopoly where big businesses become really big and stay really big because of protectionist policy, it's basically a bunch of protectionist policy. We then have at the bottom free markets and co-op markets. Basically, these are societies where there is not a lot of protectionist policy, and it's kind of like a frontier, an economic frontier, if you will. Basically, Hayek was a fan of the free markets category. We then have socialism. So socialism is, on the left side of socialism, you have centralized technocracy and decentralized technocracy. So what does that mean? Well, technocracy in this case basically means where it's basically where the workers did not choose your position, but rather your credentials gave you power within the economy. Whereas on the right, you have democracy. Democracy is where the workers actually vote people in. We then have centralized technocracy and centralized democracy at the top, and that's basically where you have a mostly top-down planned economy. Where either the whole thing is from top to bottom, every detail planned all the way from the biggest project to the smallest workplace plan, or it can be just, most things are planned top to bottom. Decentralized technocracy and democracy is where most things are bottom to top planned. Now, in order for something to be communist, it has to be 100% decentral. So, basically, socialist, if it is socialist and it's decentralized, that pretty much means that at least some part of it is going to be top to bottom planned, even if that some of it is extremely minor. Alright? Because if it's not, then it becomes communism. Communism, let's take a look. So first off, we have let's take a look at manual. So manual communism is basically where you don't have the technology necessary to make everything, like post-scarcity resource world, like where all the resources are post-scarcity. So that's manual republic and direct manual. Then we have automated on the right. So automated republic and direct automated, that is basically where everything has reached a point where where all resources are at post-scarcity levels. We then have Republican. We have the Republic form at the top. That basically means that the workplace is still operating off of election. So basically, the people who plan are still being elected. It's still bottom to top because it's communism, but it is still based off of election. Whereas direct on the bottom is where the workers themselves directly vote on the plan. They don't have to elect a representative to do that. All right, so this wraps up this part of this political spectrums, making the new political spectrums. I hope you liked this video and I hope you learned something. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you want to support the channel. See y'all.